Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee. Valentine's edition on a not-so-romantic week of global events. It's been a week that Moscow has long been waiting for. A 90-minute call took place Wednesday between Presidents Trump and Putin, discussing how to end the fighting in Ukraine. Highly productive, said Trump. There'll be great benefit to work together, he added, and spoke of visiting each other's nations. And the real news of substance, no NATO future for Ukraine, and Kyiv is unlikely to get its captured borders back from 2014. Vladimir Putin well and truly in from the cold. Could President Zelensky be frozen out as his country is carved out? The EU warns of a dirty deal behind its back.
You know, you can agree on whatever, but it will just simply fail because of the implementation is not there. Any quick fix is a dirty deal.
It's been a week where the Gaza truce came close to collapse. First, Hamas postponed the release of hostages this weekend, accusing Israel of violating the truce. Then came an ultimatum from President Trump: release all the hostages or, quote, let all hell break loose. The militants dismissed what they call the language of threat, but later said they would continue with the plan. We also now have a glimpse of how the recently freed hostages in Gaza were treated. Families speaking publicly for the first time. Ola, the mother of Daniela Gilboa, said her daughter was starved and abused by the captors.
She got thinner. She lost a lot of her weight. In the last 2 months, they got a lot of food so they can gain weight.
And it's been a week where world leaders packed into the Grand Palais here in Paris for a global summit on artificial intelligence. Stop worrying, stop over-regulating, take the brakes off, allow its potential for humankind, was the nuance-free message from the new Vice President JD Vance. Safety issues barely featured. Innovation, investment, the priority. The French President Emmanuel Macron did forewarn of Wild West dangers to society without control, but he was also making the most of a sales opportunity.
In this world where I have a good friend in the other part of the ocean saying, drill, baby, drill. Here, there is no need to drill. It's just plug, baby, plug. Electricity is available. You can plug, it's ready.
Welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee. Week 4 of Donald Trump's so-called days of thunder, flooding the media space with continuous announcements, executive orders, ultimatums. Blink and you'll miss it. And that's the plan, says Steve Bannon, his one-time ally. Keep ahead of the curve, scupper the ability of the courts and the opposition to catch up. Well, let's start by introducing the panel this evening. Let's head to Washington, D.C. and bring in Danny Kemp, the White House correspondent for Agence France Presse, AFP. Fantastic to have you with us, Danny. Tell us about your week and what you've been witnessing in the Oval Office.
It's been a very busy week, as have the last 4 weeks since Donald Trump returned to the White House. It's almost hard to keep track of.
Yes, I can hear you. You hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We have another guest who's jumped in through the gallery talking to you at the same time, Danny. We are still listening. I think we've heard a brief cameo from Jeremy, but we're with you, Jeremy, in just a moment. Danny, you were saying this is a week you certainly didn't have under President Biden. That much access.
The access has been, I mean, the amount of the times that we actually see Donald Trump is every day is incredible. I mean, yesterday, for example, we saw him 3 times in the Oval Office, and then we had a press conference at the end of it. You end up asking Trump probably more questions in the space of a week than you would have been able to ask Biden in the space of a month or 2 or even more. So in terms of the actual FaceTime you get with the president, it's certainly a massive change from the Biden administration. The issue then is that you have to make you then have a lot of there's a lot of material to get through, and there's also you also have to fact check and sort of keep your wits about you in terms of what he's actually saying, because as journalists, that's our responsibility is to really, make sure we keep him on the spot even while he's talking. But yeah, it's been an incredibly busy week, an incredibly busy 4 weeks.
Danny, there's a lot to talk about inside the Oval this week and what happened, some implications. We're going to get to that in a moment. Pleasure to have you with us. Let's go from Washington to Oxford and bring in Jeremy Kahn, Fortune magazine's AI editor, author 2 of Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpower future. Good to see you, Jeremy. Listening to Danny, talking about the changing pace of the job, particularly this new world under Trump. You're in a very new world too, reflecting on America's AI Unleashed plan. Now, we're going to get to the ramifications of the AI summit this week, but did you get a sense that AI, the actual issue in the room to the leaders that was coming their way, did they get it, the leaders in Paris, or could a few of them do with reading your book?
No, I mean, it was interesting. I think a lot of people have gotten the idea that this is a very impactful technology, and they want to play in this game. You saw a lot of leaders in Paris talking about what they can do to increase AI investment in their own countries, to build data centers in their own countries, and so that's interesting. I do think that there are quite a lot of upsides with this technology, and there was a lot of talk about the upsides at the AI summit in Paris. The summit series was originally started actually, though, to talk about risks around AI, and actually some of those risks I thought were somewhat minimized in the summit, and maybe we can talk about that a little later in the program. But that was a little surprising. I think there are lots of not even sort of big risks, but lots of sort of near-term harms potentially from this technology that that a lot of leaders are actually don't want to talk about at the moment and aren't doing that much about. There's such a deregulatory push, certainly coming from the United States, but that seems to have affected people in Europe too. And you heard a lot of talk at the summit about whether Europe's EU AI Act has already gone too far, and if there's things that Europe can do to actually try to ease the burden on companies and to really encourage innovation and investment in Europe.
An inconvenient truth right now to go into some of that, which we will do shortly on the programme. Great to have you with us, Jeremy, too. Let's bring in the studio, three-time Pulitzer Prize-nominated independent international correspondent, Bozu Deragahi. Bozu, great to see you, as always. Let me ask you the question. ChatGPT, Mistral's, Le Chat's, any of these AI tools, Grok for them, are you using them? Are you keeping AI at arm's length for journalism right now?
I mean, I sometimes use it in place of the editors that have been fired, and I ask them, can you go through this article and, the job of editors that are no longer around because they've been cut from news organizations. So I sometimes ask, I put my article in and say, can you find any editorial mistakes or inconsistencies? The job that, Roger Ainsley, for example, at the Los Angeles Times used to do for me. But I mean, I would just say that, there's a lot to talk about with regard to this technology. And as you're, very intelligent, my predecessor, who's just speaking right now, was saying that there's a lot of people who don't want to talk about some of the most crucial aspects of this technology.
Wow. And you've given a kind of bleak assessment of our
I just don't trust the people
career
who are in charge of these things.
Yes.
Do you?
And the job cuts.
Do we trust the oligarchs and the officials who are guiding this AI push? I don't trust any of them. I don't trust Elon Musk. I don't trust the billionaires who are, in charge of Google. I definitely don't trust the Chinese government. The people who are pushing this technology have a very poor track record on multiple accounts.
Yeah, who's going to be the architect of the new system? Right, we're going to get into it soon. Bozu, great to have you with us. And Anastasia, let me bring you in as well. Anastasia Kirilenko, investigative journalist, co-producer of the documentary Putin and the Mafia. Have you embraced AI yet, or not?
Yes, I use it.
In what way?
For example, when I'm doing fact check, Russian propaganda publishes a lot of fabrications in Ukrainian, pretendingly that there's a document in Ukrainian which proves that Ukrainian have the famous biolabs and bioweapons. And I put the documents on the chat, and it shows me grammatical mistakes. And it helps me to write some anti-fakes articles. That's
very interesting. So this is a stream of thread, not just from Russia, but extreme far right of US politics as well, that often say these are bio-weapon labs rather than, which I believe exist, biolabs in Ukraine.
Biolabs exist in every country. Even in Russia, I think until 2011, there were biolabs financed by US just to prevent viruses. It was in the frame of international programs, maybe supported by the famous now USAID. And so Russia closed it, but it was not military. It is just to prevent Ebola, or other viruses. Well, COVID was not prevented, but nevertheless, in the future, it will be needed. So in Africa, I'm sure there are also biolabs financed by the US for the same reasons.
I say the extreme ends of the far right. Actually, I should talk about the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who's talked about these conspiracy theories in the past as well. Great to have you with us, Anastasia. And let's start, because the biggest event this week, the one that might have sizable impact on the war, is that phone call and the mantra that's changed. The mantra of old, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. That was what President Biden repeatedly echoed in Europe at NATO summit since February 2022. In essence, no negotiation on ceasefire without Ukraine at the negotiating table. Biden's nouns for Russia's leader: killer, butcherer, murderous dictator, pure thug. Well, February the 22, when he first started using the term, was also the last time President Biden is confirmed to have spoken to Vladimir Putin. That was then. This is now.
You know, this morning, the president spoke to President Putin of Russia. They spoke at length, and the president released a statement following that conversation in great detail.
It was a 90-minute phone call between the new US president and Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. The detail via Trump's social media platform first was that the men agreed to end the Ukraine war, start talks on peace immediately. President Putin was, quote, wants peace. Trump said he, quote, was even using the same words as I do. Common sense. Jinx. NATO membership for Ukraine was unlikely. Trump said Ukraine returning to its pre-2014 borders before Crimea was annexed, also unlikely. He said he had called President Zelensky to update him too after the call to the Kremlin. And when asked by reporters what about that, he said, well, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Is it an equal partner? This was his response.
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
Would you support Zelensky ceding territory or exchanging territory in any agreement to end the war?
Well, he's going to have to do what he has to do, but, you know, his poll numbers aren't particularly great.
Zelensky's poll numbers aren't great, to put it mildly, he says, adding that there will be elections at some point. So one day it took, not for the war to end, that's what he said originally, but perhaps the beginning of the end, the dynamic changing, making peace a more likely prospect sooner, but at what cost? And when does negotiation become appeasement? Borzu, let's start with you. Are we going to see peace in a matter of weeks, and is this just the opening gambit?
I mean, that's a really hard question to answer right now. We're not sure what was discussed in that 90-minute conversation, but, you know, it's definitely a win for Putin because, you know, the U.S. has zero leverage over Russia. Putin can say whatever he wants. He can basically do whatever he wants. It's a nuclear power, the second largest nuclear power on the planet. And meanwhile, the only point of leverage in that equation is U.S. putting pressure on Ukraine. So essentially, he's set up a dynamic, Putin has, where Trump is basically putting his fist on Zelensky's neck, basically ordering him to do this or that in order to achieve Washington's geopolitical goals at this point. So I think that it's a big win for Putin, huge, huge, huge win for him.
A huge win for Putin. Anastasia, how is this being reported in the Russian press right now?
In Russian press yesterday, it was, of course, a big joy. But in fact, today, JD Vance, he corrected a little bit.
He added caveats.
Yes, he amended the statements by Donald Trump. So let's see, for me, I'm not so pessimistic. From the one hand, Russia became, Putin became insane. He is since 25 years at power. Can you imagine? Stalin, I think he was during 28 years at power. So it can't continue like this. Russian press, official TV, and they showed me saying I'm Russophobic, Russiaphobic, or whatever. No, I think all critical people, they help Russia to change. And, by the way, it's also about bad condition of Russian army. I know that French, by the way, they have their own military intelligence, which shows that for Russia, the future, the army is not glorious. So maybe also European leaders, they immediately reacted the reaction was very tough. Saying that they won't abandon Ukraine. Maybe they don't want to do only philanthropy, but they have also objective data on Russia, on Russian economy. It is not collapsing yet, but there is more and more crisis. So in a matter of weeks, we won't see peace, but we won't see peace like Putin wants it. And Putin, he still is repeating that Ukraine is a Nazi country, Zelensky is not legitimate. Wait, you are since 25 years at power. So Putin is legitimate and Zelensky not. It's ridiculous. Russia does not recognize war crimes. So they make laugh at Bucha massacre every day on state television. So I'm explaining this insanity of the state of mind of Putin, and there are people even worse than Putin, FSB generals, security services of Russia. They are even more patriotic. They are against any concessions, so they want to continue the war.
Danny, listen to Anastasia mentioning Bucha as well and how it was mocked. You covered Ukraine extensively, didn't you? You were on the ground in Bucha and the massacre of the Ukrainian population by Russian soldiers back in 2022. What do you think President Zelensky can do here to make himself heard? He seems to have gone down the route of offering something transactional to Trump, rare earth minerals.
Yeah, it's a very good question about what Zelensky can do, and certainly the rare earth minerals is it's a good suggestion in a way, because what Trump wants to do and what Trump likes to do and what he prides himself on doing is his ability to make deals. And I think it's important to remember that for Donald Trump and for his administration, everything is seen through the prism of domestic politics in a way that I don't think it has been with other US presidents. And Biden had a quite internationalist view on things, whereas for Trump, really the only priority is how it's going to be viewed at home, and can he be shown to be looking after America's interests? Can he be shown to have got America, to extricated America from entanglement in another foreign war? And can he honor his pledge, as he said before he was elected, to end the Ukraine war within, I think he said 24 hours, and he also said before he was elected. So every day that he is in office, that war is still going on, is a day that journalists can say to him, when are you going to honor that pledge? You said you would get that war finished before you took office. What are you going to do about that? So, I mean, in terms of what Zelensky can do, Zelensky is, he's not a novice. Zelensky knows how to work people. He's been very good at motivating the international community, the West, to get behind him. He's been playing Donald Trump pretty well so far as well. And the most important thing is not to get on Trump's bad side, probably. And Zelensky has been very careful about doing that so far. We'll see how it goes. But certainly, I think as long as Zelensky is trying to stay on the right side of him, that's going to be his best path for now. What that means in terms of whether negotiations end up with Russia, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for him.
Yeah, and the language you'd have heard this week at the Oval Office, we heard a moment ago, suggest, you're not seeing the same strong language about Zelensky that we heard about Vladimir Putin, to the same extent, at least. Jeremy, it's also interesting to note that on that call, for those 90 minutes, we're told that they discussed AI together, Putin and Trump. They're unlikely to talk about the best ways to regulate the industry. What's more likely, do you think, to have been the shared point of interest here?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and we don't really know. We haven't gotten a full readout of the call about what exactly about AI they discussed. I mean, it is possible actually that they discussed, there are some people in the world of sort of global governance, AI governance, who think that there really is a common ground that can be made between leaders in the United States, in China, in Europe, on some basic controls about how to use this technology. There's some people were telling me in Paris that they feel that any leader sort of would fear technology that they can't control themselves, whether you're a dictator or you're democratically elected. So maybe there's some ground for discussion of that, but we don't really know. We do know that the Biden administration had attempted to talk to the Russians about trying to get them to agree not to ever give control over their nuclear arsenal to an AI system. That's something that's very dangerous. The Biden administration said they would never do that. Trump, actually, when he was in power the first time, also sort of forswore that idea of ever giving nuclear control to an AI system. But there are some radical elements sort of around the U.S. Air Force that have suggested that it might be necessary to do that, in part because of the development of things like hypersonic missiles by Russia and China, a capability which the U.S. has not yet matched. And that this has reduced essentially the warning time when we get of a nuclear attack to such a degree that the only way to respond, and to maintain a deterrent would be to say, well, we've given control over a retaliatory response to some extent to an AI system, because it can make a judgment and a determination faster than a person could, and that's the only way to deal with this shortened potential warning window. A lot of people have pushed back on that, said it was a very bad idea. Like I said, Biden said he would not ever do that. But it's possible they discussed that, because I think the Russians have not completely forsworn that possibility. So it's possible that was part of their conversation.
That is very interesting, and it gives us a sense of the bigger stakes, the existential stakes as well. Bozu, interesting also listening to Steve Bannon this week, who claimed to have kind of come up with the source code of Trump's plan of just pushing everything out right now. But he talked about widening the lens and said Donald Trump isn't necessarily looking at Ukraine. He's looking at how to weaken Iran by getting a deal with Russia and kind of softening their relationship. What do you make of that?
I think that Steve Bannon is deluded. I think that Putin is the kind of person who will tell Trump whatever he wants to hear about Russia or China and other more intelligent and sophisticated U.S. presidents, from Bush to Obama, and including Biden in the first couple of years, tried to wean Russia and China from Iran and failed, but were always told what they wanted to hear when they sat down with leaders or foreign ministers from those countries.
Very interesting, Anastasia, just trying to understand where things stand for Vladimir Zelensky. You've talked about his situation. I just wonder for you, when you're looking at this now, and there's all the talk of, we are at the beginning of the end, how significant do you believe this moment is right now in changing the direction of the conflict?
It was very important, of course, yesterday. Many observers even wrote that it was worse than the 24th of February 2022, so worse than the beginning of the war. Also, Ukrainian officials or former officials, they said many times that they were happy that the war started during Biden administration, because even Biden administration, they did not believe at the beginning that Ukraine was capable of resisting. They wanted to exfiltrate Zelensky, maybe you remember. Mm-hmm. But still, Biden administration helped Ukraine a lot, and so everybody was worried what will happen during the Trump administration, and now it's happening. But in the same time, it's a dynamic. So in Russia, we say this is better than an endless evil.
Yes.
So let's go through it. Trump is a populist, so we will see.
Let's see where the path goes. Danny, just a word from you, because we've had the Munich Security Conference, and quite an odd situation for US senior figures. You have JD Vance there, who's not pleased all of the Europeans, a lecturing tone, say the Germans, talking about changing course on migration that the US wants to see, talking about essentially getting its shopping order, paying more, we've heard that before, for what the US is giving in return. Then we've seen Pete Hegseth saying it's a cocktail party, didn't bother turning up. Let's have a look what he was doing instead this morning.
But make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
So Uncle Sam, Uncle Sucker, he was in fact jogging this morning with troops in Germany instead. He said he decided that he wasn't going to the cocktail party. And yet we have Marco Rubio as well, Secretary of State. I think it was a chip in the windscreen. He couldn't end up getting there. What's your take on what came out of the Munich conference? Was it a cocktail party or more than that?
Well, I don't know if it was. I'm glad I wasn't there drinking the cocktails. But I mean, again, I think the thing, the most important thing to remember that with all these officials, with Vance, with Hegseth, and with Rubio, is that they will say what they have to say, and it will be taken by people as a statement of definitive U.S. policy. But as Hegseth himself admitted the other day, when he had to slightly backtrack on the commitment to on possible NATO membership for Ukraine, until you hear it from Trump, it's not policy, basically. You get hints of some of the thinking in the administration from Vance, particularly with the what he was saying in his interview with the Wall Street Journal today about the possibility, about other possibilities and other leverage. But until you hear it from Trump, you really can't take it as definitive. And I think European capitals will have seen Vance's speech today on lecturing them on democracy, and certainly it's going to make headlines, and a lot of Europeans are going to be resistant to this and up in arms about it, and fair enough. But I think a lot of these capitals ultimately know what the situation is, and they know that until they hear it from Trump, it's not definitive.
Yeah, it means nothing. Very interesting, Danny. Thank you. Well, let's go to other world events this week. There's a Venn diagram with some of the characters in the same issues, because on Tuesday this week there was a masterclass in diplomacy on display at the Oval Office. It was from Jordan's King Abdullah, the first Middle Eastern leader to visit the White House since the changing of the guard. He's adamantly opposed to, but under pressure to, accept Donald Trump's vision for Gaza, the US to own it, for Jordan to take half of the Palestinians who would be forced out under that plan. A pressure reinforced just before they met, because President Trump threatened to withdraw payments to Jordan, the fourth highest recipient of US foreign aid, $1.7 billion. This is how it played out.
Why should the king take in the Palestinian people? He's made clear he doesn't want to.
Well, I don't know, but he may have just something to say, because we discussed just briefly. I think maybe you want to say it now, or?
Well, Mr. President, I think we have to keep in mind that there is a plan from Egypt and the Arab countries. We're being invited by Mohammed bin Salman to discussions in Riyadh. I think the point is how do we make this work in a way that is good for everybody? Right. Obviously, we have to look at the best interests of the United States, of the people in the region, especially to my people of Jordan. And we're going to have some interesting discussions today. I think one of the things that we can do right away is take 2,000 children that are either cancer children or in a very ill state to Jordan as quickly as possible, and then wait for, I think, the Egyptians to present their plan on how we can work with the president to work on the Gaza challenges.
I didn't know that, what you just said, 2,000 children with cancer or other problems, and that's really a beautiful gesture. That's really good, and we appreciate it. And we'll be working on the rest with Egypt. I think you're going to see some great progress.
Jeremy, was that the art of buying time on display from King Abdullah there, shifting it towards Egypt perhaps in this instance?
Yeah, I mean that looked like it was a very masterful way of sort of punting the question and trying to offer, as I think a lot of leaders have learned, it helps to offer Trump something. So that gesture of yes, we'll accept 2,000 very sick children, it gives him something at least. And I think that was the lesson people took from that first sort of set of negotiations that Mexico and Canada had over tariffs was offer something, even it can be fairly small, it can sort of be a gesture. But it allows him to claim he's gotten something. Whether that'll be enough in this case, I'm not so sure, but we'll see.
Bozo, the other point here is that in being very creative with diplomacy, nobody is saying it's a non-starter directly. And when you hear President Trump saying, everybody I speak to loves it, maybe he's telling the truth.
But they do say they don't. It's a non-starter.
But not to his face.
Of course. Look, let's, as Steve Bannon says, take the wider view. The wider view is that the U.S. is flailing, that it is become a completely dysfunctional state, dominated by oligarchs. It's going back to like the late 19th century, essentially. And if you're a smart, diplomatic, minded world leader, you'll just basically wait Trump out because it might change. Mentioned, Russia making a deal with the U.S. over Iran. Why would Putin do that when, who knows, President Kamala Harris would come in 2028 and completely reverse course on that? There's basically a culture war and a political war in the U.S. It's made the country completely dysfunctional. The polarization has made it, has infiltrated for the first time, even in the 60s, it never happened, infiltrated the foreign policy and the national security infrastructure. If you were a smart leader, you would try to play that system, game that system. And that's what countries like Qatar, Jordan, Russia, and slowly China will start to do with the U.S.
But Anastasia, the issue of sitting things out, waiting to see what happens, and let 4 years pass is a big risk for a number of countries, isn't it?
I didn't mean we should remain actless. And it is, of course, extremely dangerous. So what Trump is a populist. Even his proposal to deport Palestinians, how many people will radicalize after that? I fear, of course, what will happen next. The same is with Ukraine, normalizing Putin. This is to open appetites of Putin. Russian propaganda says that Baltic countries are doing genocide to our Kaliningrad by disconnecting electric system from Kaliningrad and reconnecting to the EU. In the insane mind of Russian government and their propagandists, it's a genocide of Russians, and therefore...
So this is the plan by the Baltic countries to switch off their supplies of energy last weekend to Russia, using Europe instead, to which they've switched off, Lithuania did, to Kaliningrad. But we understand that Putin had already set up a system that it could be more self-sufficient. Is that right?
Yes, but not only. Russian political analysts, pro-Russian security services, they say it is like genocide to our Kaliningrad. They really use these words, hard words, and so to have a pretext in the future to invade also the Baltics. Several dozens years ago, Russian tanks were on the half of Europe. So Trump, what is he doing? Normalizing Putin. He, of course, increase the risks of future war, of expanding the war, in fact. But the good news, well, he makes his proposals, it will fail, and then maybe it will slowly go to normal life.
And meanwhile, Jeremy, given what Anastasia said on how the Russians are viewing the situation, when we look at the situation itself in Gaza right now, and we see that a week where suddenly the Netzarim corridor, the Israelis moved away from it, so allowed people to go from the south back to where their homes were once, thousands more Palestinians. And in all of this, I want to talk about what you might, in your field, have seen quite a lot, which is a lot of AI-generated deepfakes, trying to work out what's actually going on in that conflict, and indeed in the West Bank right now. We're hearing of many civilian casualties there as a result of Israeli operations. How easy is it, how blurred is that line at the moment between deepfakes, AI tampering, and being able to direct quickly what is real in Gaza or the West Bank, what is fake?
No, it has gotten very difficult. And it has complicated the job of fact checkers and journalists and international observers tremendously, because it is very difficult at the moment to determine what is real. You can create deepfake images, deepfake audio, that is pretty much indistinguishable from authentic audio and authentic video. There are efforts underway to try to create standards that would automatically label content that is produced both for legitimate content produced with cameras, as well as AI content produced with certain AI applications, with sort of these content credentials that would enable news organizations and fact checkers to have some idea whether the content was created using AI or whether it seems to be from a legitimate source. But the problem is you have bad actors who might not use those sorts of programs. There's plenty of these AI deepfake generating programs that are open source software, and even if they have any guardrails sort of attached to them, it's very easy for people to strip those away. And then you're going to, I think, some people are saying, well, if we move to a world where everything has content credentials, if you see content that doesn't have those, then it should automatically be suspect. But I think that's a little problematic because there's also a lot of archival footage and things that won't have those content credentials having been applied. And there's also a problem with the content credential standard that the world seems to be coalescing around, in that a lot of people say it's not a particularly secure standard, it's maybe too easy to tamper with. And then you're going to have this whole other issue about whether the content credentials are legitimate, or whether they themselves have been altered either by humans or by an AI system. So I think we're in this world where it's just very, very difficult to tell fact from fiction.
And in the meanwhile, we still haven't been allowed international reporting teams in there, aside from the local reporters who are on the ground. The Hamas-run health authorities saying 47,000 people have died. The Lancet in London, the research authority body, saying that it's more likely at least 68,000 Palestinians. Well, let's go from there and look at the events at the start of the week. It was here in Paris that we saw a summit at the Grand Palais. The world leaders, several titans of the tech world, heading there for an AI big grand gathering. Now, once upon a time, back in 2023, at the inaugural summit in London, Jeremy mentioned this earlier, it was called the AI Safety Summit. The safety part removed, it's now called the AI Action Summit. How to implement it, who implements it, as well as investment, ethics, regulation, key here. Borzu was talking about this a moment ago, these key things. Ahead of the summit, the IMF pointed out almost half of all global jobs will be impacted by AI, either replaced or complemented, is the prediction. It is a fork in the road moment, whether to act now to regulate and ensure safety from the dangers it poses, or follow the path of the new Trump administration and the so-called broligarchy who want AI unleashed. The brakes off, caution thrown to the wind approach that they argue it will allow for innovation. This is what the new VP told the summit.
We believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off.
So, an element to add into there, mentioned by JD Vance, China doing its own thing, he said. There's been a lot on the agenda. President Macron, meanwhile, warned of the risks of AI Wild West. He said, creating mass control of society without checks, balances. At the same time, he was also fishing for likes, setting himself up AI style on social media.
Prends ensuite tous les cheveux qui restent sur le côté droit. La techno a une culture à part entière.
Jeremy, let's begin with you. What did you make of JD Vance's speech, first of all? And I mentioned about the other leaders, were they well briefed enough? His point was over-regulation is a big risk, but you might say he would say that.
Yeah, I thought Vance's speech was a very forceful speech. It was. I think people were not necessarily surprised by what he said. I think maybe the tone surprised people a little bit. It was very forceful. He's very direct in his criticism of Europe. He, in particular, singled out both the Digital Services Act that's just been passed in Europe, as well as GDPR, which has now been in effect for a number of years, as problematic to U.S. companies in particular, and he feels that those laws should be changed and that Europe should move in a deregulatory direction. The EU AI Act also came in for criticism as maybe being too stifling of innovation in Europe. So I think people were expecting Vance to say some of those things, but he was very forceful in his language, and I think that's surprised some people. But it's definitely the way the Trump administration is moving in this very deregulatory kind of accelerationist mindset. And I think the idea that there are risks from this technology is getting very short shrift, certainly in the U.S. And I think a lot of other leaders were sort of embracing that. Macron kind of paid lip service to it in his speech, but he also, if you look at the big headlines that come out of it, was all about, let's go faster and faster on, embracing this technology. Macron sort of exhorted people to go faster and faster, said France would go faster and faster, and announced this huge investment in data center infrastructure and other kind of AI startup investment in France, which, was a very pro-French position. But it sort of encouraged other leaders, I think, to sort of view this as an economic opportunity. But again, there are risks here, and I feel like they weren't getting probably enough attention. Maybe we've overcorrected, as you say. The earlier summits were all about safety, but maybe this was an overcorrection too much in the direction of economic growth.
Yeah, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer on this one, Borzu, but you touched upon this slightly before. We've got Emmanuel Macron. Jeremy talked about saying, this is not drill, baby, drill, it's plug, baby, plug. But the carbon footprint will be enormous for Macron's plan.
In the carbon footprint, the environmental impact, the job instability that it will create, the disruption of people's lives, and so on. Not to mention the fact that, if it was a genuine AI, genuine artificial intelligence that had a conscience and a
super intelligent
and had like a creative ability, that would be amazing and that would be incredible. No, these are basically machines that are, as news outlets from the New York Times to India's newspapers have said, are stealing content from creatives, from journalists, from artists, from researchers in academia, stealing that content without authorization or any kind of revenue, and then regurgitating it. And I use that term, scientifically, regurgitating it as artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. So it's basically back to high school, with the tech bros and the football players and the nerds teaming up against the artists and writers, essentially. That's basically what AI is at this point.
Which takes us back to Jeremy again, because Sam Altman, the head of ChatGPT, and, well, he kind of became a sideshow to the whole thing, this public tete-a-tete with Elon Musk while the summit was going on. Elon Musk had launched this takeover hostile bid for ChatGPT and OpenAI around, well, almost $100 billion, wasn't it? Let's first hear what Sam Altman told reporters in Paris this week.
The company is not for sale, neither is the mission. We're happy to buy Twitter if you want to talk about that.
Now, he went on to say this to Bloomberg, that the bid from Elon Musk was in a position of insecurity.
Feel for the guy? You feel for him? I do, actually. I don't think he's like a happy person. I do feel for him.
He's not a happy person, Jeremy. What's at the heart of this issue? Is it an existential one, ultimately? Whoever controls OpenAI could control the monopoly of the architecture of the AI ecosystem.
I think that might have been a position that one could have had a year ago. What's interesting is certainly since DeepSeek, this new Chinese model came out a month ago, it looks like actually there's going to be quite a lot of commodification of these large models, and the risk that you're going to have just one or one company could have controlled this completely has waned. I still think this is a technology that's not going to be in the hands of too many companies. So you still have to worry about a concentration of power here. But I actually think this is, in a way that Altman's not wrong. There's a lot of sort of personal issues at play here. Elon Musk had famously, he was one of the co-founders of OpenAI with Altman. He then, and they founded it as a nonprofit, kind of dedicated to open science. He then lost a kind of power struggle with the rest of the co-founding team. Musk wanted to take it over. The others didn't want him to do that. So Musk left and took his money with him, which is what actually caused OpenAI in the first place to decide it needed to take in outside investors and start developing products. And now it's, of course, trying to turn itself into a for-profit company. And it has had to sell its products become much more closed. It now doesn't publish anything. Its models are completely secret. And this has driven Musk nuts. But I think it's mostly about the fact that Musk doesn't control this thing. And he and Sam have this rivalry going. And he is trying to mess up Altman's plans to convert OpenAI from a nonprofit to a for-profit, because as part of that, the nonprofit board that currently controls OpenAI has to receive some compensation for its assets. Under some of the plans, it looked like they were going to get about $40 billion as part of this, with Musk coming in and offering more than twice that amount. It basically kind of sets this new floor where what could happen is one of the attorney generals in either Delaware or California could say to OpenAI, actually, this plan doesn't fairly compensate the public for this conversion, and therefore we're not going to allow it to go forward. So that seems to be what's happening.
Jeremy, you take us full circle or full oval this week to where we started, because I just want to get a quick last word with Danny Kemp back in the Oval. Elon Musk was there this week. You've talked about this incredible week that you've seen access. We also saw AP banned from going into the Oval Office for, in Trump's terms, not calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Briefly set out, 30 seconds or so, what the situation is there.
Well, the situation is as you've mentioned, the White House has said that the Associated Press can't have access to events in the Oval, and it, I think just before we came on air, had extended that to Air Force One as well. I know that the White House Correspondents Association have expressed outrage and concern about that and call on the White House to open things up again to the Associated Press. You know, it's a clearly a big issue. I mean, the Oval is where things happen.
Danny, you've made that very clear today. What a place to see. Thank you so much to the panel alongside me this week. Brilliant insights, unique perspectives. The renowned independent journalist Basu Daragahi, thank you. Also the investigative journalist Anastasia Kirilenko, thank you too. In Washington, as we just heard, the White House correspondent for AFP, Danny Kemp, and in Oxford, Fortune AI editor and author of AI Survival Guide, Jeremy Kahn. Happy Valentine's. See you in 7 days for the world next week.